This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, you are listening to Left From Nowhere on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. I am your host, Tyler West, and today we've got a slightly different episode for you to listen to. I've got a pre-recording for you of a talk that was given for the society last year, the Otago Socialist Society, who are the sponsors of this show and who I happen to be a member of. And that talk is entitled Of Parasites and Plagues, the Social Origins of Cosmic Horror. It was given by Chris Lam, a friend of the society, for our Halloween lecture last year. So it was given on October 30th, 2024. And it's a very interesting talk which deals with the idea that plagues and parasites may not necessarily be entirely natural. To read a little bit from the blurb for that, to give you an idea of the talk we're about to have a listen to. For hundreds of years, natural disasters were theorized as sublime, as forces beyond the grasp of the human mind, let alone human control. Yet the intensification of global warming and globalization more generally have led to extreme phenomena such as cyclones, wildfires, pandemics, and mass extinction. The world is getting weirder. Unlike the weird of Lovecraft's time, this weird is increasingly theorized as emerging from our own actions. Contemporary weird fictions are intimately aware of this. Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach series engages with polluted ecosystems that mutate the human beyond recognition. China Mayerville's Bass Larg series features irradiated wastelands and quantum weaponry that rupture space-time itself. Rather than connect to an outside world, these forces emerge through human systems of exploitation and control. This talk explores the dystopian worlds of Inside and Pathologic 2 video games that simulate societies in crisis. The non-human features prominently as either a biological technology of control or an unintended consequence of capitalism. Parasites and plagues fester, devouring the rotten body of capital along with its marginalized subjects. Yet even among the ruins, glimmers of hope can be seen. Unlikely alliance forms across humans and non-humans. New worldviews emerge and new futures are striven for. So this was given as, that was the blurb for a talk that was given for a Halloween lecture last year, as I just mentioned. And we're just going to have the recording of that lecture. It's not a particularly long one, in the 25 to 30 minute range. We're just going to have a recording of that for our show today. That talk was given as part of our regular educational activities at the Otago Socialist Society. So if you are interested by what you hear, perhaps consider following us on Facebook or Instagram or signing up to our mailing list to find out about future events which we will be holding as part of our educational activities. Now, without giving too much more delay, we will get into the talk once again of Parasites and Plagues, delivered by Chris Lam on the 30th of October 2024. And I will come back after that, and I will have the regular cultural reviews and a sign-off for the show. But the bulk of the show this time around is going to be that talk. So without further ado, we will get into it now, and you will hear from me on the other side. I am thrilled to introduce our guest speaker, Chris Lam. Chris is a recent postgraduate from the English program at the University of Otago, where they completed their master's thesis this year, The Simulated Weird,
video games, weird fiction, and gothic horror. They hold an undergraduate degree in zoology and genetics, and I forgot which one was the major and which one was the minor. And another undergraduate degree in media studies and sociology. Their research draws on this diverse intellectual background to explore themes of social crises, alienation, weird fiction, cosmic horror, and the Gothic. So can we please all give Chris Lam a round of applause.
Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to begin by saying I had a really hard time writing this talk. I was trying to condense 2 chapters of my thesis into this, and it was a nightmare. So I had to step back and just think, what is this talk about? Oh, it's about plagues and parasites. And so we're going to focus on that. And I'm going to step through 3 kind of different frameworks for understanding that. The first will be theology, the second is biology, and the third is economy. And I'm going to go into how these different frameworks explain crises. They give meaning to crises. So with plagues, one of the earliest and most memorable plagues can be found in the Book of Exodus. And this details God's revenge over the enslavement of the Israelites. And you've probably seen it. This is a harrowing account detailed in The Prince of Egypt, of all movies. And so water turns to blood, all the fish die and rot in the Nile, making water a scarce resource. Frogs, lice, flies, and locusts emerge from the river, the ground, and the sky to infest the city. And this affects the people living there, the animals, the crops, and all this makes food scarce. Then there are storms of lightning, hail, and fire, an eclipse blackens the sky, and the firstborn son of every Egyptian dies. Does this sound familiar to you? Because to me, this sounds like an account of pollution, infection, starvation, mass death, and extreme weather. Granted, this is a story, not a historical account, but its function is explaining disaster through theology. It's revealing a certain logic of the times that gives meaning to tragedy. And from this early example, we already have a sense of the anti-humanism that emerges in weird fiction. And anti-humanism is a big field, but for weird fiction, we're just going to constrain it to cosmic horror, which is the idea that there are forces too large for us to comprehend that nonetheless disorder our lives. So this theological account of disaster is a core part of weird fiction. The term weird comes from Old English. It refers to a doom, curse, or protection that descends on people. Those who transgress a moral injunction are punished by a divine or supernatural force, while those who uphold this injunction are blessed. So in Beowulf, he's wearing a cloak during a battle, and because he's a brave king who follows his duties, it protects him. So the logic of the weird seems pretty straightforward from this example. It's to conserve the law of the father. But what's weird in these tales are the mechanisms used by divinity to protect and punish. So what does it mean to be doomed? It means knowing the end is coming, but not knowing how. And this is a very typical theme within Lovecraft's fiction, paranoia, knowing, or at least suspecting something is wrong, but not being able to pinpoint it. And if we go back even earlier to Greek tragedy, to the one of Oedipus Rex, Oedipus knows he's fated to kill his father and marry his mother, but he's still surprised that this happens. So despite our comprehension of moral codes, their enforcement on the level of the supernatural, ruptures conventional logic. It's incomprehensible. So we know about plagues and the weird. I'm going to switch to parasites now to move us to the modern era. So the discourse of parasites is inseparable from capitalism and evolution. And these are 2 discourses that converge in degeneration theory. parasites gain a new attention with the emergence of Lamarck and Darwin's theories of evolution. For those unfamiliar, Lamarck proposed that acquired traits of an individual can be transmitted to their offspring through reproduction. Darwin argued that some individuals are born with fitter traits for their environment and so survive to pass these on. And for a long time, Lamarck was just kind of ridiculed after Darwin. But now we know that it's actually a mix. Hereditary operates through genetics and epigenetics. So you pass on your DNA, but if a mother is going through traumatic stress, that gets passed on as well, and it can shut down certain genes. So on a level above DNA, there is, something's being passed on. So these two frameworks, they're not necessarily conservative, but they're combined with colonialist discourses to birth degeneration theory. And degeneration is the belief that living beings can regress back to a prior evolutionary state at the level of morphology or cognition. And degeneration was used to justify the social positions of women, the poor, the colonized, and the impaired under industrial capitalism. It made quite outrageous claims, it compared women to plants, Africans to monkeys, disabled people to parasites, and it was believed that degeneration could spread to others, and therefore must be kept under check through sterilization, segregation, and poverty. So you can understand why parasites become a major talking point. Parasites were used as a cautionary tale of what could happen to humans if contact between wealthy Europeans and all the other people were to occur. And I don't make that point lightly. All the degenerationists were educated European men who had a stake in preserving their class of power. Degenerationists drew on many life forms to make these points. So one argued that the barnacle Sacculina begins like a crab with a head, mouth, tail, legs. It's capable of striving and hunting for its food. But then it wriggles into the shell of a real crab, spreads its tendrils in, and becomes essentially a sedentary vampire. Another believed that fungi were once these majestic, self-sustaining plants who lost their chlorophyll through degeneration, becoming little freaks that just thrived off decay. And we know better now, such creatures are highly adapted to the environments they reside in. But the point is the parasite, like the plague of the biblical story, was used as a stand-in for morality. It was a natural phenomenon used to explain a social ill. And an understanding of disability can further this point. Disability scholars argue that while impairment is individual, disability is social. Even if you're paraplegic or autistic, the barriers you experience are institutionally enforced. Stairs aren't natural. 8-hour workdays aren't natural. Being bombarded with loud, flashing ads isn't natural. These are conditions that are socially constructed and therefore can be changed. So with the advent of industrial capitalism and factory labor, rigid working conditions become commonplace. And it's here that the disabled individual is born. There's someone that's incompatible with standardized labor and dense urban spaces. Through discourses of degeneration, an impaired person becomes a parasite. But you might be asking, a parasite to what? And it's a parasite to profits. So that's why neoliberals push for the dismantling of welfare and social services. They're still operating under this degenerationist logic. A lot of Gothic fiction was informed by degeneration, and I'm not going to go into the broad history of this. I'm just going to touch on the kind of end point. So H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. This was written in either the very late 1800s or early 1900s. Can't quite remember. But this is almost a satire of class struggle viewed through the lens of degeneration, because it involves a man who travels 800,000 years into the future to discover that the economic classes of England have degenerated into essentially hobbits and orcs, like due to their physical segregation. So the workers have become violent brutes who like raid the landowners, and this is from generations of hard labor, like underground, while the landowners have become these weird little fairy people, and they're just like cute and they just run around because they've just been, it's been, I think I calculated this, it was like 40,000 generations of just leisure. So, he's making a mockery of class segregation. But he's doing this through a degeneration lens, which is really interesting. Like, he was a man of his time, but he was clearly resisting the discourses of his time. He was turning them against what was the status quo. And he was trying to say that class society is mutually degenerating. Wells's War of the Worlds brings us closer to modern germ theory. An invasion of Martians on Earth is brought to its knees by an infection. This is a strange transitional text because Wells is still informed by degeneration, yet he couples it with epidemiology and ecology, frameworks that see the world as composed of dynamic systems and feedback loops. And this is also like an interesting political turning point in science fiction because First Contact is transformed from a romantic adventure to a cosmic horror synonymous with colonialism. I'm going to turn now to the modern understanding of disease. Like, if you were a parasite, where would you want to live? Probably a densely populated location with high rates of migration and poor sanitation. This is the modern city. So before industrial capitalism, populations were more spread out. There was less travel and pollution was smaller scale. If you were a virus, your best way to survive is to have low virulence and high transmission. And that's essentially, you want low mortality rates and you want to spread real fast. The reason for this is if you kill your host too fast, you'll die with them. The migration of rural labourers into modern cities, however, leads to a new phenomenon, the quick spread of highly virulent diseases across countries and continents. And this phenomenon more generally links to the terror of ecosystem collapse. And of course, there were epidemics before capitalism, such as the Black Death. However, much like extreme weather and extinction, epidemics are much more regular now. Like, it seems like every 10 years we have another major outbreak. So there's a decent number of modern weird fiction games that delve into this. Pathologic 2 takes place during an outbreak. You're tasked with surviving the plague and tracing its emergence. And part of what's really cool about this game is that it engages with both the biblical representation of the plague and epidemiology. So at first there's an infestation of rats that emerge out of the ground. Then clouds of miasma roam the streets like stinging flies. Vigilantes begin burning infected districts. The food train never arrives. Water pumps break down. And eventually you trace the plague's origin to meatworks, which had been filling the rivers with blood. This is a mirror of the Bible. There's even a moment where the firstborn son of an industrial capitalist goes to the slums to be killed as penance for his actions. So here we have the plague of Egypt framed through epistemology rather than theology. And this plague doesn't affect everyone equally. Prior to the outbreak, the workers had been planning a strike, an occupation for the meatworks that would have disrupted production. This is a classic technique of class struggle. It threatens profit margins, forcing business owners to listen to workers' demands. In Pathologic 2, the firstborn son resolves this dispute by locking the workers in the slums for a week without food, water, or sanitation. And these are the conditions that generate the plague. So it's not just that the plague emerges from the meatworks, it's that it emerges at the intersection of pollution, overcrowding, and exploitation. This is a critique of economy, of the way workers are organized in anti-democratic workspaces by land and business owners. Like, Pathologic 2 even makes a point about how the working class were created by colonialism, Many of the workers were once part of the kin, a collective name for the indigenous people of the steppe. Their lands are stolen by colonialists, cutting them off from subsistence farming and therefore self-sufficiency. Like, they didn't need wages until they had no food or shelter. And the plague that infects their community doesn't emerge until after they're concentrated into urban squalor. So just to go back to like a 101 of capitalism, like, what is the point of capitalism? It's to generate profit. And how does it make profit? Through the intensification of exploitation at the sites of land, labor, and consumption. So at the site of land, this would be, mining more intensely, finding more places to mine, stuff like that. For labor, it would be increasing working hours, making people work more in the amount of hours that they're doing. It can be finding cheaper workforce overseas. And at the site of consumption, this would be more aggressive marketing or pushing into other countries where you don't have markets yet. And the irony of these intensifications are that they lead to crisis. They lead to a total standstill of production in Pathologic too. And so it's trying to say that capitalism is self-destructive. Like, what's terrifying isn't the plague, but the conditions that breed it. Conditions that kill and disable workers at scales previously unthought of. So Inside delves into similar themes of exploitation and disability. It takes place in a fascist dystopia, and much of its horror comes from this little white parasite, which is implanted into workers to make them docile. And you play as this little kid who has to evade the fascist forces. You stumble on these workers in railways and mines. These are workplaces associated with the industrial working class. These workers can be controlled by a helmet, and you use it to clear debris and activate switches. And, gamers are used to these kinds of puzzle mechanics, but there's a lot of unsettling imagery associated with these workers. There's a sequence where their bodies are examined and tested. At one point, they're herded into trucks and trains with their heads shaved, and halfway through the game, you pass a warehouse where they're stacked in cages. Like, these are clear allusions to colonialism as well as fascism. And this isn't surprising if you dip your toes into history. Like, fascism builds a colonialist ideology, the idea that certain races are inferior to others. And decolonial scholars have traced such racism to the transatlantic slave trade, which emerged as a response to the Black Death. Like, with half to a third of the European workforce dead, suddenly peasants had a lot more bargaining power. So the ruling classes turned to a cheaper alternative: slavery. So while fascism is remembered for its genocide, many of its prisoners were used as slaves. IG Farben, the chemical manufacturer, used 30,000 prisoners from Auschwitz alone as workers and test subjects. By understanding fascism through colonialism, we can also understand Inside's parasitized workers as a modern take on the Haitian zombie, a monster that emerged as a response to slavery, a depiction of unending toil and servitude as living death, as a life no longer one's own. So where the plague in Pathologic is an unintentional consequence of capitalism, the parasite of Inside is a planned effect. It's a technology of class suppression. This is an incredible reworking of degeneration, because it turns it into a form of structural violence, emerging out of social organization rather than biology. We see such structural violence in our own world. Things like food deserts, pollution, and medical gatekeeping. They drain us. They're parasitic. They burn through our time, energy, and money. They make us docile because our efforts are spent trying to survive. If you're struggling with your workload on top of debt, on top of trauma, on top of poor health, becoming addicted to vaping, caffeine, and sugar is easier than joining a union. What Inside does is make us see beyond the parasite to the systems of exploitation that mobilize it. So just to recap, we've moved through 3 frameworks of understanding the weird as expressed through plagues and parasites: theology, biology, and economy. With the biblical and old English tales, the weird emerged to conserve the status quo. It was tied to divine punishment. Moving into the colonial era, the weird is used to justify conquest. This is still conservative, but it's a conservatism tied to expansion. And rather than deploy the notion of sin or virtue, a new ideology emerges: scientific racism, the treatment of people as objects to be classified, managed, and killed. Much of neo-weird fiction is a response to this, and this is where we move into an economic critique of the status quo. And this is a fast-moving space. Inside came out 2016, Pathologic 2 came out 2019, and just like 10 years back, we had games like Silent Hill 2, which are quite radical on a psychological level, but not so much on a political level. And the thing with these neo games is that we're not just seeing radical critiques of capitalism in video games, we're seeing writers and designers engaging with things like disability justice and animal liberation. Like, I didn't have enough time to go further into this because I was spending a lot of time this semester trying to support neurodivergent students that were struggling with the university. But Inside goes into interspecies solidarity and like communication, while Pathologic 2 goes into I can't remember right now. I might come back to that. But yeah, these games, Pathologic 2 goes into mutualism. Like it goes into creating alternative economic structures that aren't based off profit, but are based off need. And like, I just simply didn't have enough time to like put this into my talk. It is in my thesis though. So the thing with like these kinds of themes is that the exploitation of labor is just part of a longer chain. Like it's not just human bodies that are crippled, it's animal bodies as well as social bodies. And this is a very fancy way to say we're all in this together, but just never to the same degree of responsibility. Like some people are more culpable than others. And like just as these games have deployed systemic critiques, we too have to engage in systemic resistance. Like things might be dire, but hope is found in reaching out and creating networks of solidarity. Like yours is one example of this. The Otago Socialist Society is another. And if any of you have delivered care packages during COVID, you've participated in this. So to conclude, like we can't rely on divine intervention to solve our problems, nor can we go back to a pre-modern way of living. But we can fight against piss-poor working conditions, failing healthcare systems, and PMs who create tax breaks to line their own pockets. Like these are the people burning down our world. And like, I'm a dirty pragmatist, and I will probably get in trouble with everyone here, but like, if you want to push for reform, fucking do it. But just remember that it's mass mobilization that puts pressure on the state, and that it's grassroots organizing that puts food on the table for those failed by the state. Like, I have seen many more homeless people since National got in, and I've heard about a lot of people who are disabled having a hard time with wins right now. So I really want to end this talk on an optimistic note, but I did not really get there. But like, I guess I want to end with like, as much as I wanted to end on hope, I think outrage can feel resistance just as much. And I guess in the space I'm in, having to like care for students who are not cared for by the university at all, I am feeling a lot of outrage. That's all I've got, guys. I'm sorry. That you've just been listening to was a talk by Chris Lam
for the Otago Socialist Society Halloween lecture in 2024, given on October 30th, 2024. Once again, I'm your host, Tyler West, and we're just coming back in to the recorded part of the show. We'll get into the reviews for this episode in a second, but just a quick reminder that you are listening to this on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM, and that station, whether you're listening to us live or listening to us via the internet later on, that station is the very proud host of Left From Nowhere, the show you're listening to right now, which in turn is sponsored by the Otago Socialist Society, which I happen to be a member of. Now, we'll get into the reviews. I've got 2 reviews for you, and fitting with the lecture, one of those reviews is of a video game, and then one of them is going to be bucking tradition a little bit. I'll be giving a recommendation of an Australian album rather than a New Zealand album. I usually have one free slot and then one new piece of New Zealand music. This time around I have an Australian album, but we'll get into that album second. The first is the free slot, where I will be recommending not a video game per se, but a mod of a video game, and specifically a WOD. My recommendation for a video game fitting with the horror theme is a .wod, which is a modification of Doom called myhouse.wod. That has gone kind of viral last year. It's a very impressive modification of Doom. It uses a lot of non-Euclidean geometry and physics in order to create a dizzying and bizarre map or series of maps that leave the player very confused and disoriented. Heavily inspired by House of Leaves, a book from a number of years ago now, which has gained quite a cult following. Unfortunately, one I haven't read, but it may well pop up as a recommendation when I do eventually read it. The WOD, this total conversion mod for the original Doom, utilizes techniques that probably weren't really available and certainly hadn't been thought of at the time that Doom was released, in order to, as I said, create this very confusing and disorienting atmosphere, and uses physics that don't exist in real life, non-Euclidean physics, in order to further disorient the player. Now, it starts off as a relatively simple one-map game, and it's only through exploration and figuring out what the game wants of you, or what this world wants of you, that you begin to unravel the increasingly labyrinthine and bizarre world of My House. I won't get too much into it because it's very easy to get kind of lost, and the game wants you to get lost wandering around this strange world, and be very easy to over-explain. So I'm going to leave that at that, and just kind of a general recommendation with not a huge amount of explanation of it, of this .wod of the original Doom. It came out last year. There is a very big modding community for Doom that makes WODs like this, and none of them have quite been like My House. It's a very unique experience, honestly kind of a unique experience in video gaming, which is impressive this many years into the world of video gaming. The second of the pieces of media that I'll be recommending is an Australian album from the 2000s by the band Frenzal Rom. And yes, I know I'm recommending an Australian band. Usually I would be recommending a piece of media from New Zealand paired with a free slot. But this time around, I just could not get this album out of my head. And so the recommendation you are getting is for this album, Forever Malcolm Young by Frenzal Rom, released in 2006. Frenzal Rom were and are a kind of hardcore, melodic hardcore, possibly slightly pop-punky band that have been around for about 30-ish years at this point in the Australian punk milieu. And during the late 90s and 2000s, they had a fairly high standing in the Australian music world. They were great defenders of Australian music, and they were playing the big festivals, etc. They were also one of the bands that made up Australian protest music during the John Howard era. Now, Forever Malcolm Young came kind of towards the end of their time as a major force in Australian music, or at least Australian rock and punk. But it's nevertheless full of the sense of humour as well as the biting commentary that is kind of standard for the band and will go on to be standard for the band right up until their most recent releases. The tracks are a mixture of relatively tongue-in-cheek and not particularly politically serious tracks, as well as more biting social commentary, and also just a little bit of, I guess you could say, stuff that was in the news. Not necessarily from any kind of political angle, just kind of a humorous take on things that were big stories in the 2000s in Australia. Such as Graham Abbo Henry, the song second track on the album, which just is about the life and infamous crimes of Australian gangster Graham Henry, and also a track further down that is a riff on the Chappelle Corby case, and drug smuggling to Indonesia and the dangers contained therein. There are also much more politically conscious tracks such as Red Wine and Altar Boys, which comments on the then relatively new and, to be honest, ongoing case of abuse within the Catholic Church in Australia. Obviously something that has remained a major story and a major case in Australian life, both social life and political life, as well as obviously being an ongoing criminal matter. And there are also tracks that deal with everything from cruelty to animals, that's straight up the name of the track that deals with the matter, and the bland conformity of Australian music, or as the band perceived the bland conformity of Australian music in the 2000s. There are also tracks like Forever Malcolm Young, which just kind of commentate on bands that in certain respects influenced and were a part of the life of Australian and also punk music. That influenced and shaped the band. Now, in terms of the actual sound, as I said, kind of a melodic hardcore with kind of more standard hardcore and kind of at times pop-punky influences. The music is very tongue-in-cheek, and for all of the music that's kind of commentating on news of the day as well as political issues at the time of the album's release, there's just as many that just kind of reflect on kind of young Australian life in the 2000s. Now, this album, it comes in at a fairly lean 34 minutes. There are 20 songs across those 34 minutes, so you've got a lot of tracks that are 1-2 minutes long. Don't wear out their welcome. They kind of get in, say what they have to say, make a ruckus, and they get back out again. Those 20 tracks, and at that runtime, it really doesn't wear out its welcome. Once the album is finished, and you kind of sit there and go, yeah, that was a pretty good album. You don't get a sense of exhaustion, even though there are 20 tracks across the 34 minutes from the array of songs that are kind of thrown at you over the course of it. I'm a big fan of Frenzal Rhomb, And I do love a lot of their other albums, but Forever Malcolm Young is the one that I seem to come back to the most. So that's going to be the one that I recommend. So the first recommendation that I made was the myhouse.wad Doom mod, which is relatively easy to get your hands on and install online. And the other recommendation I make is, once again, the 2006 Frenzal Rom album, Forever Malcolm Young. Now, that's going to bring it to a close for today. Once again, you are listening to Left From Nowhere with myself, your host, Tyler West, on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. And that show is once again sponsored by the Otago Socialist Society, who you can find on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you look for the New Zealand Federation of Socialist Societies, you will be able to find the website used by the wider federation, which includes the details of our very own Otago Socialist Society and a way to sign up to our mailing list. So I will be leaving things there, and you will be hearing from Left From Nowhere again in a month, when we have jumped back in the studio and record for you another episode.
The white sucks stronger by the year. The white sucks stronger by the year. The white sucks stronger by the year. The answer's never clear. You walk upon the sphere. Keep walking.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.